Hello everyone, this is Dr. Vlad Krotov, and in this video lecture we will talk about Scrum, which is the most widely used Agile project management methodology. I believe that this lecture is important and valuable for a number of reasons. Number one, this entire course, as you may well know at this point of time, is taught from the perspective of the so-called traditional waterfall methodology. The methodology that has been around for quite some time that emphasizes structure, certain tools, certain deliverables being used, and so forth. Now, Scrum is a part of the so-called Agile family of project management methodologies or frameworks. And the Agile approach to project management constitutes a radical departure from the traditional waterfall approach. For example, the traditional waterfall approach emphasizes structure. Agile and Scrum is on the opposite side of the spectrum. There is some structure to Scrum and many other Agile methodologies, but this structure is very loose, right? I mean, it's deliberately very loose, so you, as a team leader or as a team member, have freedom to do things that best fits the current situation that you're in. So that's one example of the radical difference between Scrum and waterfall approach. Also, I would say that classic waterfall approach is very prescriptive. It basically tells you that there are certain steps you need to go through, there are certain tools that you need to use. Scrum does not really prescribe any tools. Okay, it's a framework within which teams can organize themselves and use any tools that they think is necessary to deliver superior products and services for their clients. So yeah. Scrum and Agile is quite different, so I think it would be intellectually interesting to look at a totally different way of thinking about project management, and that's what we're going to do today. And number two, we will use Scrum for managing your group project. Okay. Now, as Jeff Sutherland, one of the creators of Scrum, once said, he said something like, "Scrum is easy to learn but takes a lifetime to master." I think you can learn the basics of Scrum, the main concepts, the main idea of Scrum in approximately 1 hour. Now, there are some nuances, there are some extensions of Scrum, but the essence of Scrum can be learned in under 1 hour, I think. And that's what we're trying to do in this lecture. We're trying to learn Scrum in approximately 1 hour or less. However, it is practicing Scrum that is difficult, okay, because you need to develop certain team management and people skills to actually implement the theoretical concepts and ideas of Scrum. So that's why we are using Scrum for managing your group project, so that every week you have an opportunity to practice the Scrum processes, meaning ceremonies and ideas in a simulated real life-like environment. Okay, so that's another reason why Scrum is important, because your group project will be managed using Scrum. And if you don't master the content of this lecture, then you'll be a bit lost. You may be wondering why we're doing certain things, why we're doing things in a certain way in relation to your group project. So that's why it's very important that you take this lecture seriously, and it's very important that you learn all the Scrum roles, processes, artifacts, and also the overall framework that Scrum is. So that's why I believe this lecture is very important, valuable, and interesting. And the final thing I would like to say that, on a more general note, outside of the scope of this class, if you're wondering how to organize people in a team, if you're wondering how to manage teamwork, I mean, in any situation, whether at school or in your job, then Scrum gives you all those answers. Scrum teaches you how to build and sustain high-performance teams, regardless of what those teams do and in which industry organization they work in. Now, specifically, after completing this lesson, you should be able to explain what Scrum is, articulate the importance of Scrum, why is it important, why Scrum is useful, discuss the origins of Scrum, where this methodology came from. Also, you should be able to compare and contrast Agile and Waterfall approaches to project management. You should also be able to articulate Agile values, meaning the things that Agile practitioners believe to be true, and also discuss the main roles, ceremonies, and artifacts of Scrum, meaning you should be able to understand and explain what this framework is all about and what the main elements of this framework are. So let's start with the 100-word definition of what Scrum is. And this is my own definition of Scrum, which is based on other people's work, of course, but I would say that Scrum is an agile project management framework. So it's a part of that agile family of project management methodology that constitute a somewhat radical departure from the traditional waterfall approach. So agile, I would say, if I were to explain it in one sentence or a couple of sentences, agile emphasizes flexibility and responsiveness, while waterfall emphasizes structure. So Scrum is a part of that new or agile family of project management methodologies. Now, the reason I'm using the word framework and not methodology is that, to me, framework is something that is more loose than a methodology, which means that it's not very structured. Framework means it's just like a way of structuring your thinking, but it doesn't really prescribe you much or doesn't tell you exactly what to do in relation to a project. Scrum teaches you how to deliver products that meet customer expectations by empowering people and ensuring flexibility and responsiveness of teamwork. So flexibility and responsiveness are also the defining characteristics of the agile movement in project management. And this is the most important part. I would say that the ultimate goal of Scrum is to build and sustain high-performance teams. So this is my explanation of Scrum in 100 words. Now, here, as you can see in this image, I think the term Scrum is related to rugby. If you've ever seen rugby, you saw that players, I'm not a big expert on rugby myself, but I saw a few matches. You see what you see here is like a formation that is called Scrum, okay? So players form that formation, and then when the game begins, they use this formation to score against the other team, okay? So Scrum is something like that. Like as a Scrum master, as a person in charge of a Scrum team, you kind of form the team, you mold it a little bit, but then you let them do things on their own. Okay, so I think that's where the term Scrum was borrowed from rugby, right? So Scrum means it's like some kind of formation, and that formation is not permanently controlled. It's a loose formation that kind of plays out on its own. So it's kind of related to this term framework. Scrum is a framework. It's like a formation or a teamwork mindset that you implement, and then you let people do their own work without controlling them and supervising them too closely. So why Scrum? Why we're learning Scrum? Why we're discussing Scrum here? Well, Scrum is the most widely used agile project management methodology. So numerous surveys show that Scrum is by far, is by far the most commonly used methodology among organizations, especially if you're talking about organizations related, in the information technology field, like software companies or technology companies. So in the so-called 2022 State of Agile report, it was stated that, out of all organizations practicing Agile, approximately 87, which means majority, overwhelming majority, practice Scrum specifically. Now, of course, Scrum is not the only Agile methodology. There is also Kanban, which I view like as a more generic version of Scrum. There is XP programming, there is a lean startup methodology. So there are all kinds of agile methodologies out there. So we're going to learn Scrum, which is one of them, but it's by far the most popular and the most widely used. Scrum has been used by all kinds of companies. Of course, you are more likely to find organizations, as I mentioned before, you're more likely to find organizations using Scrum in the information technology field, right? So software companies like Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, they use Scrum for managing software development. But again, it's not just related to software development. There are other companies like John Deere, LexisNexis, that are far away, not far away, but not directly involved in the technology field. Well, I guess LexisNexis now is more of a technology company. But like for example, one of my areas of interest and research is using Scrum in education for both managing student teams and also university administration, and also for delivering content in class, right? So Scrum can be used in education, it can be used in the legal field, it can be used in engineering, in all kinds of areas. Okay, and that's where that resource comes from, scrumeducator.org. So a lot of those materials are borrowed from this resource. So this is my kind of non-profit project where I teach educators how to use Scrum in the classroom. So yeah, Scrum has its origins in software development, and indeed it's heavily used for software development, hardware development, video game development, building websites. But it's also used in curriculum development, higher ed administration, in education in general, in the legal field. All kinds of industries and all kinds of organizations nowadays use Scrum to develop all kinds of products and services. So it's not just software development. As I explained before, Scrum in general teaches you how to build and sustain high-performing teams in all kinds of scenarios, all kind of industries and contexts. Now, if you want to learn more about the origins of Scrum, where it came from, I suggest you read books by Jeff Sutherland. He wrote a number of books about Scrum. But if you don't want to read books, go to YouTube and search for the following video, a TED Talk by Jeff Sutherland. And in this talk, he talks about his life experience in the military, as a software engineer, as a manager at a bank, and how all of those experiences led him to formulating some of the main principles or values of Scrum, and how it led him and his colleagues in the creation of the entire Scrum framework. Okay, so it's like a short video. I think it's around less than 20 minutes, but it really explains a lot as to where Scrum came from, and in response to what kind of issues or philosophical questions the methodology was formulated. So we need to compare and contrast Scrum to that traditional classic waterfall approach to software development or project management in general. So the waterfall approach emphasizes structure. It says, the waterfall approach says that there are certain phases or steps you need to go through to deliver a product or service. Like, for example, if you're building software, you first need to gather user requirements, then you need to design the system, then you need to implement or build it, then you need to test it, then you need to deploy it, meaning go live with it, and then you do maintenance, right? So there's one, you do one step at a time, and as you go from the beginning to the end, you have a finished final product. So that's what waterfall is about. Now, in case you're wondering why is it called a waterfall approach, because you see it's like work flows like water from one phase to the next. And I would add another aspect of that terminology is that that quote is found in all kinds of ancient texts and also in the Bible. The idea is that the metaphor of a river with floating water. So the saying goes something like this: water always flows, and you cannot enter the same river twice, right? Because you enter river once, you have one water there. You exit the river, you wait a little bit, and you enter it again. The water is different, right? So waterfall, kind of emphasizes that you cannot go, or you should not go back, right? Once you get the requirements, you should not go back to gathering requirements. You should start designing it, right? But of course, the reality is that nobody is smart enough or lucky enough to make every step perfect without the need to go back and correct what happened in the previous step. So in practice, a lot of times after requirements are gathered and the implementation starts, there is some kind of conflict that leads to an understanding that the requirements need to be changed. So the project manager goes back and collects additional requirements, right? And that's where Agile methodology came into play. They basically said that, well, if we're not doing it like in the way waterfall prescribes, going from one phase to another, so let's not pretend that work can be done in that structured way. Let's have a loose structure where we can freely go iterate between those steps, right? But nevertheless, this is an example of the so-called waterfall approach, a highly structured, rigid approach to software development or project management in general. Now, Agile approach is quite different from that structured waterfall approach, and this idea comes from a seminal paper by Takeuchi and Nanaka, and this paper is actually cited by Jeff Sutherland in his talk, TED Talk about the origins of Scrum. I mean, this is where the inspiration for Scrum came to him largely. So in this article, these two researchers, they were studying some of the some of the highest performing organizations, including Japanese companies, and they realized that a lot of those companies, they do product development in an iterative fashion. Instead of going through the cycle once, gathering requirements, designing, coding, testing, they formulate one requirement, they do some design based on that requirement, they code the test, they learn something, and then they go back to the requirements, right? So instead of going through this whole process once, they keep going through this process in an iterative fashion, one requirement or one feature at a time, until a viable product is delivered. But at any iteration, they already have like a sometimes rough preliminary beta version of the product. So they're not trying to finish the whole product at once. They do one feature, one addition at a time. And they believe that this is a more realistic way of doing work, because if requirements emerge during the project, because there's a saying that life is the best teacher. Sometimes to learn the requirements, to learn what needs to be done, or to learn the best way of designing or coding things, you actually need to start doing it, right? So you start doing it, and then you go back and you have another idea for requirement, or you have an idea of how the design can be changed, or how the code should be changed, right? Or how the testing needs to be modified to accommodate new design and coding approaches. So going through iterations makes your work more responsive to what's happening in the external environment, and also makes you more flexible, because you can rapidly respond to what you learn either internally through your work or from the external environment as you do work on the product, one feature or one small aspect of that product at a time. Now, what you see here are the so-called Agile values from Agile Manifesto. So you can visit the Agile Manifesto here, using this URL right here at the bottom. So there were I forgot how many, but there were a number of people, mostly from the software engineering field, who got together and proclaimed the Agile Manifesto, which was that radical departure over the way things are done in project management. So those are values, meaning the things that practitioners of Agile project management methodologies believe in. So first of all, proponents of Agile believe that individuals and their interactions are more important than processes and tools. They believe that it's largely about people. I mean, people should be able to decide on the best way to do work, on the most appropriate tools for doing work, and those things should not be prescribed to them. Also, proponents of Agile value, they emphasize working software over comprehensive documentation, which means that they believe that life is the best teacher. Sometimes to figure out what needs to be done, you need to start developing it, right? And not spending days, weeks, or months developing comprehensive documentation that outlines what needs to be done. So they're basically saying, let's start working and then later we'll document it. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So proponents of the traditional waterfall approach, they view their customers, meaning for whom they're building products and services, I wouldn't say as an enemy, but as an outsider, right? It's somebody who is outside of your team, and you need to sign a contract with them. And then if there's any kind of dispute with the customer, with the client, you need to protect yourself, protect your own position. Now, proponents of Agile saying, let's not do it that way. Let's make customer a part of our team. We're going to continuously communicate and collaborate with our customer, with our client, to make sure we deliver exactly what the customer, what the client wants. And also, I think that's probably the most defining characteristic. Proponents of Agile believe that responding to change, right, being flexible, is more important than following a plan, because plans, as Jeff Sutherland says, plans are useless. I mean, what he basically he said that planning is important, but plans are useless, right? I mean, it's important to plan, to think about how you're going to do your work, but the thing is, life is just too complex for anybody to have a plan that completely works, right? That also reminds me of Mike Tyson, who is my favorite heavyweight boxer. And I remember during an interview, I forgot who he had to fight with, But before a fight, the journalist asking, well, your opponent has this plan, he will do this, he said he will do that. And then Mike said something like, hey, every fighter has a plan until he gets punched in the mouth, right? So yeah, you may have a plan, but then life will surprise you. It will punch you in the mouth and you'll have to change your plan. So Scrum says, or Agile is basically about this. Let's not spend too much time planning, because whatever we plan, we'll have to stop and adjust and reformulate our plans. So let's jump straight into the subject matter. Using this slide, I will try to explain to you the entire Scrum framework. And after that, we'll zoom in on some of the main elements of that framework that you see here. So we're going to talk in more detail about Scrum roles, such as product owner, Scrum master. We're going to talk more about Scrum processes or ceremonies, such as sprint planning, daily Scrum, and also more about the artifacts, such as product backlog, sprint backlog, and then associated artifacts, such as Scrum board and burn down charts. So I would say that Scrum starts with you forming a team, okay? Within the team, you have regular team members, we can call them developers, people who develop things, who do work, maybe software developers, database developers, depending on the type of product or service that you're developing. You also have somebody called product owner. A product owner is basically your client. It's somebody who knows what the final product should be like. It's somebody for whom you're building your product. And then you also have the so-called Scrum Master, which is the, in Scrum, they don't want to call this person a project manager. They're saying a Scrum Master is more like a facilitator. It's like a fatherly or motherly figure that listens to all the team members, help them solve their problems, eliminate obstacles that prevent them from showing their best performance, and also somebody responsible for enforcing Scrum values and ceremonies. So you form your team. Once you form your team, you take your project, meaning the product that you're trying to deliver, and you break it down into smaller items called user stories. Now, those user stories, you can think of them as user requirements towards the final product. And those user stories are often phrased from a user perspective. For example, as a user of a travel website, I would like to be able to view pictures of the hotels that I'm booking, right? So that will be your user story one. Then another story could be something like, as a user of a travel website, I would like to be able to pay for my hotel reservations using a credit card. So that will be your user story two. So the entire deliverable, which is a travel website, that's what you're trying to build as a team, is broken down into smaller user stories, or I call them sometimes to-do items, okay? And that product backlog, it can be rearranged, reprioritized, as your team works on this project. Now, out of this entire product backlog, you take one user story and you commit to this user story for one sprint. Now, what is a sprint? A sprint is a duration of work, typically between 1 and 4 weeks, okay? So during that sprint, you commit to implement one element from the product backlog, let's say user story 1. And what you can do, you can take that user story 1 and you can break it down into smaller tasks. So that's usually what happens during sprint. Sorry, there's a mistake. It's not sprint, it's sprint planning. So now these individual tasks can be assigned to individual team members. You work on those tasks that comprise user story 1. And at the end, you have, you show a product, right? So that product, is shown during sprint review, and you get user feedback as to whether that feature, that user story 1, was properly implemented, whether something needs to be modified. And you keep working on this project one sprint at a time. You go back after the sprint, you go back to the backlog, you select another aspect, another element of that sprint, of the backlog for another sprint, then you have another product increment that you show, and then you proceed in iterative fashion until the whole product is delivered, until the project is over. And once in a while, you have the so-called sprint retrospective, where you reflect on the things that went well or didn't go well, and you adjust your Scrum work. Now, another important ceremony is the so-called daily Scrum. Daily Scrum are short, meaning like around 15 minutes, stand-up meetings that happen every day, where team members answer the following 3 questions. What you have done during the past week. Number 2, what you're planning to do this week. And also this, not this week. What have you done before? What are you planning to do now, meaning today? And then number 3, what are the obstacles that you're facing as a team member? So the Scrum Master needs to listen to those reports and help team members resolve their problems that they report. Now, by the way, daily Scrums are not for doing actual work. They're really more for touching bases with the rest of the team and staying in touch with the rest of the team so that everybody knows what other people are doing, and for Scrum Master to see what people are doing, what's their progress, what they did yesterday, what they're planning to do today, and whether they need any help, right? If you need a detailed collaboration session, then you schedule that meeting outside of the daily Scrum. So this is the essence of the Scrum framework, and now we're going to zoom in on some of the details of this framework. So we already mentioned that there are certain roles in Scrum, such as product owner, Scrum Master, Scrum team members. We also said that there are certain ceremonies, such as sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review, sprint retrospective. And then there are certain artifacts, meaning objects, that are used for organizing Scrum work, such as Scrum board and burn down chart. And we're going to look at each of those elements of Scrum in a bit more detail. So let's start talking about product roles. A product owner is somebody who defines the features of the product. He or she decides on the release date and the content, meaning what needs to be released. He or she can help the team prioritize features according to market value, which means what are the most valuable features of the product, which features need to be implemented first based on that value. And also a product owner adjusts features and priority after every iteration or as needed. And product owner is the ultimate authority on whether the work is acceptable or not, because he or she accepts or rejects work results. So to make it simple, I would say that a product owner is your client representative. It's somebody for whom you're building your product or service. So it's somebody who is the ultimate authority on what the final product should be like. Now, the so-called Scrum Master represents management of the project. He or she is responsible for enacting Scrum values and ceremonies and practices. One of the most important goals of a Scrum Master is to remove impediments to group work. He or she needs to listen to people and help them remove their obstacles, help them get resources to ensure that the team is fully functional and productive. In other words, they have everything that they need to do their best work. The Scrum Master also enables close cooperation across all roles and functions, and also shields the team from external interferences. So for example, if there's any kind of change in the budgeting or any kind of message from the top management, the Scrum Master needs to deal with that so that his or her team is focused on the actual work and not on politics or some high-level business considerations in relation to the project. I told you before that the role of the Scrum Master is close to the role of a project manager, although in Scrum, in Agile movement, they don't like the term project manager because they think it's like a bossy figure that tells people what to do. So the Scrum Master, he or she is the master of Scrum values and ceremonies, but he or she does not tell people what to do. Right? It's more like a fatherly or motherly figure that helps people show their best work. The Scrum team, a Scrum team typically consists of 4 to 7 people. I think 5, 6 is the ideal size. I think 4 is a bit too few. 7 is already a bit too many. It's a cross-functional team. Your Scrum team may include programmers, testers, user experience designers. Depending on what you're developing. It is assumed that members are full-time, which means they're fully committed to your team, to your project. But there may be exceptions, like for example, a database administrator may not be needed for the duration of the entire project. He or she may only be needed when a database expert is needed to develop a database or fine-tune a database. Now, membership can change only between sprints. During sprints, there are no changes allowed. You commit to work, you work together. Teams are self-organizing, which means you don't have titles. Everybody is just a member doing something towards one common goal. But sometimes titles are necessary to facilitate work. So what happens? So now we're done talking about our Scrum role. So now we're going to talk about some ceremonies. So what happens during sprint planning? During sprint planning, one or more user stories are selected from the product backlog. These user stories can be broken down into smaller specific technical tasks that can be assigned to individual team members. The workload associated with each task is estimated. So for example, it can be in man hours or person hours, or sometimes Scrum teams use abstract units like story points, 1 or 2, 3 story points, just to show relative difficulty or relative complexity of each task. Now in Scrum, work is never assigned. Team members volunteer for these tasks. So ideally, everybody should be volunteer doing what he or she believes is within his or her capacity and doing something that he or she is interested in. Because you know that if you assign work, you may lose people's motivation. Now, the daily Scrum is another important ceremony. It's conducted daily. It's a short meeting, usually limited to 15 minutes. It's a stand-up meeting, which means that it's not formal. There's no preparation for it. And during that meeting, the Scrum Master makes sure that everybody answers the following 3 questions. What did you do yesterday? What will you do today? And is anything is standing in your way? Is there any problems? Are there any problems that are preventing you from showing your best work? Now, just previously before I said by mistake, like, what did you do last week instead of saying day? And the reason I said that because when I implement the Scrum framework in class, we have weekly Scrums because we don't meet every day, right? We usually meet if it's a graduate course once a week. So that's why I'm asking people, what did you do last week? What you're planning to do this week? But in that actual Scrum methodology, those are daily Scrums, not weekly Scrums. So the questions are about yesterday and today. So it's not for problem solving. The purpose is just to touch base with all the team members. If you need to have a very detailed working session with somebody, you do it outside of the daily Scrum. You do it during actual sprints. You can view the answers to those questions as status updates because you communicate what you did yesterday. But it's more than just an update. It's a commitment, right? Because when you're answering those questions, like what you will do today, you're committing to doing work in front of other team members. Other stakeholders can be invited during to daily Scrums, but only the Scrum Master, Product Owner, and Scrum team can talk. So what is a sprint review? This is something that happens at the end of the sprint, so the team presents what it accomplished during the sprint. It typically takes the form of a demo of a new feature or underlying architecture. It's informal. It's not based on PowerPoints. It's just like a demonstration where you discuss what you have done, you get people's feedback. You shouldn't spend too much time preparing for it. The whole team participates and you invite the world, which means anybody who is interested in that final product can attend and offer his or her feedback to the entire team. Okay, sprint retrospective. Periodically, you as a team take a look at what is and is not working well. So typically, the meeting lasts 15 to 30 minutes. The team gathers and discusses what they like to start doing, stop doing, or continue doing to improve their work. It can be done after every sprint or once in a while when you feel that adjustments to teamwork are necessary. The whole team participates, such as the Scrum Master, Product Owner, the entire team members. Possibly you can add customers and others to offer input on what needs to be changed in teamwork as well. Now, when it comes to Scrum artifacts, the most important Scrum artifact, and we'll be using this artifact in this class as well, is the so-called Scrum board. Now, your Scrum board is, first of all, it's your product backlog, so you can enter all those user stories or to-do items in your to-do column. And then it also serves as your sprint backlog, because what you do, you move those user stories of cards from the to-do list to the doing tab to show that you're committing to a certain aspect of the product backlog for a particular sprint. Once you're done, you can move it, let's say, to the review tab for quality assurance, where the product owner, which can be me, looks at the quality of your deliverable and offers you feedback. And then only after you see feedback and you improve quality, that user story, that aspect is considered to be done. Now, one software that is frequently used for creating Scrum boards is Trello, and we'll be using that software in this class as well. Now, there is something called burn down chart. There is another important artifact that is kind of connected to the Scrum board. You see, for every user story or for every card, you have story points. You see, so here we have 4, here we have 1. Now, a story point can be an abstract scale. I usually use person hours. So, for example, if I'm saying that creating a network diagram has 4 points, I'm estimating it should take one person around 4 hours to create it, or maybe 2 people 2 hours each for a total of 4 hours to create it, right? So burn down chart means this: you add all the story points from the entire backlog, and in our case it adds to 60. And after every sprint, you should burn some of those hours. So for example, after one sprint, you should accomplish some of that work and go from 60 hours, let's say, to 52 hours. So you'll accomplish like 8 hours or 8 story points worth of work. And then you proceed. So after every sprint, you should steadily deliver something until you hit 0, which means you burn all those points. And that's why it's called burn down chart. So ideally, you should work steadily, which means that you start burning those hours of points at a steady pace until you deplete them all, until you accomplish them all. But the reality is that it's not as smooth, right? So sometimes you see like this line shows hours remaining. Sometimes the team works well, but here they discover that something needs to be added or there's some kind of setback. So they kind of go back from, let's say, 38 hours to 45 hours, right? Because they added additional work. Then they think a little bit here, and then they go down and they add another thing. Then they accomplish a lot of work. Then there's another setback, and then they rapidly burn it towards the end, right? So ideally, teams should work at a steady, consistent pace, but the reality is not as simple. Now, we also, sometimes we build physical Scrum boards. So here we have like a physical board-based Scrum board with the burn down chart, right? So these post-it notes, they represent user stories, and you see like those stars, they represent person hours or simply story points, right? So in our particular case, so all those user stories were moved from the to-do tab to the done tab, right? And then you can see the burn down chart went to 0 as well. So that's it. I mean, in this short video lecture, I tried to convey the essence of the Scrum framework. Again, as Jeff Sutherland says, Scrum is easy to understand but takes a lifetime to master. I suggest you pause on this slide and make sure you can answer all of these questions listed here. If you cannot answer any of those questions, I suggest you go back to chapter notes or review this video presentation again, because you need to understand all the main aspects of the Scrum framework, because it's an important part of this course, right? I mean, we need to know the approach that is a radical departure from the waterfall approach, and also you need to understand all those ideas to fully understand what we will be doing as a group when working on your group project. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
The struggle is real. I'm spinning these wheels.